You were recently asked about the term globalize the intifada.
You've got to say it's not right.
Advocates for Palestine say it's meant to signify resistance by the oppressed to their oppressors.
Globalize the intifada.
Yes. Globalize the intifada.
Globalize the intifada.
Why not just condemn it?
Globalize the intifada.
Do you condemn that phrase, globalize the intifada? Do you condemn that phrase, globalize the intifada?
First of all, understand, he's going to have the entire establishment, the oligarchy, the billionaires coming down on his head.
And when asked about it again and again, he refuses to say, no, I'm against Jews worldwide.
Globalize the intifada.
So maybe you didn't mean to be saying it's open season against Jews all over the world, but that's what I hear. So do you have any response to that?
New York constituents that I've spoken to that are alarmed. They are alarmed by past public statements. They are alarmed by past positions, particularly references to global jihad.
I've said at every opportunity that there is no room for anti-Semitism in this city, in this country. It pains me to be painted as if I am somehow in opposition to the very Jewish New Yorkers that I know and love and that are such a key part of this city. I get messages that say the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim. I get threats on my life. On the people that I love. And I try not to talk about it. Because the function of racism, as Toni Morrison said, is distraction.
Mr. President, your beloved New York City may well be led by a communist soon, Zohran Mamdani, who in his nomination speech said he will defy ICE and will not allow ICE to arrest criminal aliens in New York City. Your message to communist Zohran Mamdani?
Well, then we'll have to arrest him.
Zohran Mamdani is running to be mayor of New York City, the epicenter of global capitalism, the birthplace of hip-hop and the modern LGBT rights movement, the home of the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, and the stolen land of the Lenape people. Although most people would really much rather you forget about that particular injustice. Zohran Mamdani is New York City. Not that he's Lenape, but he's an immigrant. A Gujarati Muslim from Uganda. Bear in mind how much of New York and, let's be honest, America's culture comes from black and immigrant communities. On top of this, he's a democratic socialist, and therefore actually gives a damn about making life better for the millions of people who live in the massive fruit. Is that not what it's called? That's what they called me when I was there. So, given that Zohran Mamdani has proven himself not just through his popularity on social media, but through his success in the Democratic Party primary for the mayoralty of the city, in which he absolutely thrashed former golden boy of the Democratic Party and current demon sex pest Andrew Cuomo, you would think that the party and the media would be genuinely curious as to what it is exactly that gives this man the juice.
Who's the number one spice?
Why is he popular, and how can we replicate it? Well, they're not, because that would mean admitting that there are a bunch of socialist positions that poll really well across all aspects of American society. So the establishment machines, even those within his own party, got to work on finding some way to take him down. Because God forbid a genuinely popular figure be allowed to exist within the Democratic Party, and after much deliberating, the Democratic Party worked out that Zohran Mamdani is, in fact, this is going to shock you, a Muslim. I know, I was surprised too, but it turns out he was actually quite open about it. The clues were so hard to piece together, but they were all there once you started to look. And not only is he a Muslim, he also is not a fan of apartheid states that commit. And that, I suppose, is just un-American. After all, where would the United States even be without racial segregation, mass slaughter of innocent indigenous populations, and strangling even the slightest notion of using government to help people instead of exploiting them in the cradle? Although, to be honest, some of that, well, a lot of that was Britain's fault for kicking it off. So this isn't a session in yank bashing here. Well, not exclusively. If you're new here, I should point out, before any Americans get any ideas about coming after me, that I am basically a professional Britain hater. You don't need to tell me that my home country is fucked. Bitch, I know! I'm transgender! And just to further defend myself, my grandma was from New York, and based on how many Americans call themselves Irish because their great-great-great-great-grandmother was from County Cork, that makes me as American as apple pie. Apple pie is actually British though, so, sort of brings the whole thing together, doesn't it? But unlike myself, Zohran Mamdani does live in the United States of America, and thus, he is eligible. Eligible? Eligible. One of those words. He's one of those to run for mayor of New York. Just not for president, for what I'm assuming are probably racist reasons, just to annoy some of my American viewers further. But while he's running for mayor of New York, he, unfortunately, has to put up with rhetoric from American politicians and questions from American journalists. And instead of treating him like any other mayoral candidate, they've taken to grilling him about whether or not he would die for the glory of the currently mid-apartheid state of Israel.
Come on, Israel, let's get sickening. Oh.
Again, he's running for mayor of New York. But that didn't stop him being grilled about whether he would visit Israel, apparently the 6th of the 5 boroughs, despite its antipodal location. Just check it out.
The first foreign visit by a mayor of New York is always considered significant. Where would you go first? Left to right, Ms. Adams.
First visit, I would visit the Holy Land.
Mr. Cuomo?
Given the hostility and the anti-Semitism that has been shown in New York, I would go to Israel.
Mr. Tilson, where would you go?
Yeah, I'd make my 4th trip to Israel, followed by my 5th trip to Ukraine, 2 of our greatest allies fighting on the front lines of the global war on terror.
Mr. Mamdani.
I would stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that.
Mr. Mamdani, can I just jump in? Would you visit Israel as mayor?
I will be doing, as the mayor, I'll be standing up for Jewish New Yorkers, and I'll be meeting them wherever they are across the 5 boroughs, whether that's in their synagogues and temples, or at their homes, or at the subway platform, because ultimately we need to focus on delivering on their concerns.
And just yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not as a Jewish state?
As a state with equal rights.
He won't say it has a right to exist as a Jewish state. Be very clear.
And his answer was no, he won't visit Israel.
I said that very
That's what he was trying to say.
No, unlike you, I answer questions very directly.
All right.
My goal would be to take my first trip to Israel. My wife's life work in this area means a lot to our family, and it could coincide with my young son Miles' bar mitzvah.
Now, if I were mayor of New York, I wouldn't be thinking about an official visit to anywhere as a priority. People can't afford to live in their city, and I'm already dreaming about making out with the Wailing Wall sloppy style? No. I'm with Zohran. What the fuck are you doing? You're running for mayor of New York, not mayor of Tel Aviv. And I think the answer to that question, and the public response, took the mainstream media and established politicians back a little bit. Because most people, even cockroach-infested right-wing shut-ins like Asmongold, agreed that Zohran was right here. And that everyone in that lineup besides him immediately saying they're going to go visit Israel as mayor of New York is just kind of fucking weird.
Stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that.
Mr.
You got my vote.
Anyway, what happened is that a rat got in there and it died.
Even if your intent there is to show that you care about the large Jewish community in New York, they're in New York. They're not in Israel. They're where you are, right now. Go visit a few synagogues in the city. Get to know the community and their concerns, face to face. Don't fuck off to a different country just because it claims to represent all Jewish people, despite it very obviously not doing that. If you think you're appealing to the Jewish community in New York by going to Israel, you're anti-Semitic, honestly. You wouldn't try to pander to your local Muslim community by immediately leaving your post as mayor to go visit Saudi Arabia, would you? Yeah, I'm very confused. I asked my MP what he's going to do about the lack of wheelie bins, and I told him my name, and suddenly he's in Mecca. Do you have to go to Rome to show you understand Italian Americans? No! In fact, you wouldn't understand anything they're saying because they're all speaking Italian and they're going to be confused as shit that you're spending your time as mayor of New York in a whole ass different country. Testa di cazzo! The utter defeat on the optics of this confrontation did not stop people trying, though, and the controversy they've tried to pin Zohran on since has been genuinely baffling. Because the media and the Democratic Party higher-ups are insistent that Zohran Mamdani condemn and apologise for words that he never said, to the point of harassing him to the point of tears, and getting Bernie Sanders to try and persuade him to concede to their ridiculous attacks. And it's no secret that a large part of the reason they're doing this to him is not even because he's a socialist, but because he's a Muslim. So, Zohran Mamdani, will you condemn the phrase, globalize the intifada?
Globalize the intifada.
Yes.
Globalize the intifada.
Globalize the Anti-Fascist. Globalize the Intifada.
If you don't, we're going to make sure you hear that phrase for weeks and weeks and weeks until you can't sleep without hearing journalists harass you about it in your head. Oh, don't worry, we know you didn't say it, and we know you believe in free speech and that you understand what intifada means much more than any of us and realise it's not actually a bad word, but we want to break you as a man. Now, where have I heard that one before? Nobody talked about his politics. There was only one intention: to break him as a man. Huh. That was weird. I felt for a second like I was back in the UK in the period between 2015 and 2019, except this time it's also massively fucking racist. I mean, it was also massively fucking racist then too, but, you know. But that couldn't be it, right? Surely the criticisms of Zohran Mamdani are more substantive than that, right? Right?
He is pro-jihad against Jews worldwide, and when asked about it again and again, he refuses to say, no, I'm against Jews worldwide. He just, well, the language that I use, and he does the slippery talk.
He would somehow target synagogues if they were contributing to groups like Hatzalah, ambulance services, in a way that he could hurt the synagogues. I just don't want to give out information that's false, but I also don't want to shrink from information that's true.
They are alarmed by past public statements. They are alarmed by past positions, particularly references to global jihad. This is a very serious issue because people that glorify the slaughter of Jews create fear in our communities. The global intifada is a statement that means destroy Israel and all the Jews.
Good evening, New York City! It's me, someone who visited as a child once about 3 months before 9/11 and didn't even think to glance at the Twin Towers while they were still there. Me, Brigitte Empire, history misser outer, but present no other, because I, like the rest of the staff at the Daily Telegraph, the only newspaper in Britain who still calls New York New Amsterdam, have seen all of this before, except less openly Islamophobic. But still Islamophobic. But I'm not here necessarily to say that this happened before. It's happening now. But to explain whether Zohran Mamdani said anything at all, and then explain what the fucking intifada even is, since the American press and Democratic politicians seem to think that saying it is the equivalent of joining ISIS, because they're only not seen as a party of rabidly and blood-curdlingly racist scumbags because they're constantly compared to the Republican Party, who are basically just every comically evil Saturday morning cartoon villain you've ever seen, teamed up, flush with billions of dollars in cash, and ready to feed millions of innocent people into a wood chipper to try and satisfy the sulfuric bloodlust. But I will also a little bit be talking about how this happened here, mainly because I need Americans to know how fucking insane the anti-Corbyn hysteria was here, and how bad it might get where you come from. Jeremy Corbyn, for those of you not in the know, was the UK Labour Party leader from 2015 to 2019, and as a principled socialist, he got what people are now calling the Zohran Mamdani treatment. For years. Here's a little taster. A tie is a mark of ambition. Jeremy Corbyn alarmed me by wearing one, as it showed he craved power. Corbyn abandoned the Chairman Mao-style bicycle his neighbours always see him riding. The day that Jeremy Corbyn is hurting us more than helping us, I won't knife him in the back. I'll knife him in the front. So that's very cool and very normal. And that last quote from Jess Phillips, the smuggest person to get absolutely crushed in Labour leadership since Liz "We Need to Be Tougher on Benefits" Kendall, has shades of Kristen Gillibrand from this year, who didn't seem to get the memo that the phrase they were attacking Zohran for, even though he never said it, was "globalise the intifada." Instead, Kristen, apparently seeing a brown person shitting her pants in racist fear, went on a long rant on the radio about how terrifying it was that Zohran Mamdani wanted to globalise jihad.
They are alarmed by past positions, particularly references to global jihad.
The fact that she was not fired for this, she didn't even really get a slap on the wrist, should tell you everything you need to know about the current leadership of the Democratic Party, who still refuse to endorse Zohran, by the way, despite him winning the nomination, and how much they actually care about fighting racism. Namely, not at all, because, oh my god.
Senator Schumer, you're going to be endorsing Zohran Mamdani?
I'll be meeting with him. We had a good conversation. He's run a good campaign. I'll be meeting with him.
What do you say to people who say, why are you not endorsing the guy that won the Democratic primary in a contested election in your backyard?
Well, I look forward to sitting down and talking to him. I didn't get involved in that primary election, and I don't know him well.
We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest.
Just so we're clear, Zohran Mamdani never called for global jihad. Obviously. I can't believe we're having to clarify this instead of writing off the person that said that as being KKK levels of racist. But did he say, globalise the intifada? You would think so from the news coverage, wouldn't you? But no, he didn't. In fact, this whole controversy started because he was asked to condemn the phrase, globalise the intifada, since it has been used by some pro-Palestinian protesters, and as a pro-Palestine politician, and, as is being implied, quite racistly, as a Muslim, Zohran himself must answer for this phrase, as he must answer for every Muslim around the world and everyone that's pro-Palestine for their every word. Except, he mustn't answer for this phrase, because Zohran gave a good answer to this question, even though it was something he never said, and it all should have been good from there. Even though it was fucking weird to ask him that in the first place.
That's not language that I use. The language that I use and the language that I will continue to use to lead this city is that which speaks clearly to my intent, which is an intent grounded in a belief in universal human rights. And ultimately, that's what is the foundation of so much of my politics, the belief that freedom and justice and safety are things that, to have meaning, have to be applied to all people, and that includes Israelis and Palestinians alike. In my campaign, I've put forward a commitment to increase funding for anti-hate crime programming by 800%. I don't believe that the role of the mayor is to police speech in the manner especially of that of Donald Trump, who has put one New Yorker in jail who's just returned to his family, Mahmoud Khalil, for that very supposed crime of speech. Ultimately, what I think I need to show is the ability to not only talk about something, but to tackle it and to make clear that there's no room for anti-Semitism in this city. We have to root out that bigotry, and ultimately we do that through the actions, and that is the mayor I will be, one that protects Jewish New Yorkers and lives up to that commitment through the work that I do.
But quickly, for the people who care about the language and who feel really concerned by that phrase, why not just condemn it?
My concern is to start to walk down the line of language and making clear what language I believe is permissible or impermissible takes me into a place similar to that of the president, who is looking to do those very kinds of things, putting people in jail for writing an op-ed, putting them in jail for protesting. Ultimately, it's not language that I use. It's language I understand there are concerns about. And what I will do is showcase my vision for the city through my words and my actions.
Because Zohran Mamdani, if he's to be seen as a legitimate Democratic politician by the higher-ups, was supposed to condemn it. There can be no room for principles of free speech when it comes to Israel-Palestine in the eyes of Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. There can be no room for explaining that intifada isn't a scary word and makes perfect sense to say when it comes to Israel-Palestine, according to Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer.
He did what? Oh my God. He can't do that. Somebody's gotta stop him.
The only answer acceptable coming from a politician is, I condemn that phrase. And after that, they'll find another phrase you didn't say to also make you condemn. Because this isn't at all about genuine concerns about this phrase. It's not about anti-Semitism or appropriate speech. It's about tearing down Zohran before he can be elected mayor. And if he does get elected mayor, tearing him down to make sure he is mayor for as little time as possible. Zohran never said, as far as we can tell, the phrase globalize the intifada. But he's Muslim and he's pro-Palestine, so people use that phrase as a bat to beat him with. If he condemns it, not only will he lose credibility with his base, but they'll also not be satisfied. They'll move on to other phrases that some pro-Israel people find distasteful, for example, from the river to the sea. And if you compromise on this, if you give in, as it looks like Zohran is about to at the time of writing, or at least it's been briefed that he will after Bernie Sanders met with him and insisted he did so, you cede the ground to those attacking you. You give them the edge. You're fighting on their terrain now. You will be discredited in the eyes of your supporters for ceding ground for no reason other than to stop the harassment, compromising perhaps on your principles. And the same people attacking you will not stop. They will declare victory and prepare for the next attack. Because the goal is not to genuinely inquire as to your positions. The goal is to prevent you from getting too close to power. Because you're principled, because you're left-wing, and because you're Muslim. The purpose of each attack is not to hold you to account like people insist. No, it's to break you as a man.
Don't trust the liberals. They will betray you.
Honestly, I try not to criticize left-wing politicians even if they've done some stuff that fucking disgusts me, but Bernie Sanders does deserve the flack he's getting for this from the left. His insistence that Zohran more carefully address what he said about Israel is honestly batshit. The only reason to back down on his frankly very reasonable statements is to please the Democratic Party apparatus, which is insistent on swallowing AIPAC money and voting for sending more and more missiles to Israel, no matter how many thousands of corpses these arms shipments create. There are people who, and I don't know if Bernie is one of them, think that condemning the crimes being done by Israel right this minute is electoral suicide. But that's clearly not the case anymore. In fact, views on Israel and Palestine in America have shifted dramatically in the last 2 years, since the current horrors reached a fever pitch following October 2023 and continuing up to today. In fact, a Gallup poll released in March 2025 showed that support for Israel among Americans is at its lowest in 25 years. And though only 33% of total Americans surveyed said they were pro-Palestine, that was pretty heavily skewed by Republicans. Republicans, you see, show 83% favourability to Israel, which honestly makes sense given the Republican Party core principle is just everyone now.
Condone first-degree murder. Advocate cannibalism. Eat shit.
For Democrats, however, the number is only 33%. And those are the people you apparently need to keep on side. Democrats insisting on dying on the hill of supporting an apartheid state currently committing are increasingly out of touch with their voters. And, though this is taking a bit longer, out of touch with the general public. The numbers for Democrats have actually flipped completely since 2013. 46% of Democrats want the USA to reduce arms sales to Israel, and only 1 in 3 Democrats now view Israel favourably. Zohran's instincts, even beyond his principles, are right on this. And Bernie Sanders, as much good as he might have done in the past, he's old. He's not in the position to be keeping tabs on the changing tides of public opinion, at least compared to Mamdani. And the fact that he and Chuck Schumer are aligned on this should be quite worrying. Chuck Schumer is terminally unpopular, and wrong about everything regarding this conflict, and to be honest, most other things too.
People are aroused. I haven't seen people so aroused in a very, very long time.
Zohran is right, and Bernie should have learned from watching how smear campaigns like this unfolded across the pond that conceding never works. In fact, people tried to smear him too, and if he wasn't Jewish himself, they would have been labelling him anti-Semitic for his opposition to sending arms to, in his words, Netanyahu's war. In fact, some of them tried. So let Zohran Mamdani cook. He's doing better than most of you. Let him be the guy.
We will win.
As far as I can tell, the closest Zohran Mamdani got to globalize the intifada was a tweet from literally a decade ago recommending a New York Times article about the increasing radicalization and vocal support for violence against Palestinians by the Israeli government, warning that a third intifada looms. But to understand that, I'll have to move on from the phrase that Zohran Mamdani did not say and explain what the hell even is an intifada anyway.
The first intifada was sparked by the deaths of 4 Palestinians in December 1987. Palestinians had already spent 2 decades struggling with the injustice of living under Israeli occupation. The intifada marked the first time Palestinians from all parts of society began such an intense resistance.
The word intifada is an Arabic word for an uprising, or, if you're one of those people who are obsessed with translating literally, a tremor or shaking off. You'll most commonly hear the word in English when referring to the first and second intifadas, which were Palestinian uprisings against their colonial occupiers following the of innocent Palestinians by the IDF. Uprising against their colonial masters is their right under international law. When someone says, globalize the intifada, which Zohran Mamdani absolutely did not, they are calling for actions to be taken across the world to prevent Israel from committing the worst crime it's possible to commit. Something they are actively doing, and have been for a year and a half, if not arguably much longer. And for governments to do everything they can to prevent this crime from continuing, as again, is the duty of all countries who signed the Convention under international law, which includes many of the countries who are actively complicit in this crime, such as my own country, the UK, which is actively doing reconnaissance and refueling for the IOF's assault on Gaza. And that's just the complicity that we know about for sure. They're also actively clamping down on pro-Palestine protests, labelling pro-Palestine groups as terrorist organisations and arresting people for supporting them, or even actions that might suggest that they might support them, such as holding pro-Palestine placards or waving the Palestine flag. And as if that wasn't enough, they're also housing the companies that make some of the weapons that are being used to commit this crime, and selling them themselves to the people doing the murdering. All of this is breaking international law, and all of this is actively aiding in the worst crime it's possible to commit, something that people have only just started calling out our Foreign Secretary for, but now they have, and it's making him look very, very guilty and very, very going to The Hague.
Palestinians have been driven out of roughly 85 to 86% of Gaza's territory. There's now 2 million people in a 20 square mile radius. I just want to quickly read you a quote. Gaza will be entirely destroyed and the Palestinian people will leave in great numbers to third countries. Do you know who said that?
15%.
Do you know who said that quote?
You tell me.
So that was said by Bezalel Smotrich, who's a minister in the Israeli government. I'm going to read you another quote. Permanent forced displacement is a violation of international law. Do you know who said that? That was said by you, Foreign Secretary, yesterday in the House of Commons. So when you've got Israeli ministers saying quite openly that they're willing to violate international law, and that's by your definition, why don't you take them at face value and suspend all cooperation until you know for sure they won't do that?
A globalised intifada would, presumably, ban Israeli products from entering the country, sanction the state of Israel, prevent trade with the country altogether until it stops this crime, or at the very least, halt fucking arms sales to aid in their crimes, pulling ambassadors, supporting the ICJ case brought by South Africa into these crimes, and with any luck, take concrete action to prevent these crimes, as is every country who signed the Convention's literal duty under international law. And none of them are doing it. Well, except for one. The most extreme, in major scare quotes, because it is not extreme to try and stop these crimes and save millions of lives, is the interpretation I think most people are scared of when they get scared about this phrase. Direct, concrete action of the kind we well understand was necessary in the case of, for example, ending the in Nazi Germany and Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe. Something that we all recognise now that the world did not do soon enough. Letting 6 million Jewish people, along with many Romani, Slavs, gay people, socialists and others die before the Red Army and the rest of the Allies put an end to the Reich. The only country doing anything close to the concrete action necessary to prevent these crimes right now is Yemen. And for their dedication to preventing these horrors through their blockade of the Red Sea, which has resulted in Israeli ports shutting down permanently, they were labelled a terrorist group by the United States and certain other countries, and the peaceful dove Donald Trump dropped millions of dollars of on them. Again, Yemen is following international law by doing what they can to put pressure on the Israeli government to stop. And they have been punished severely for trying to do not only the right thing, but the only legal thing. Clearly, we need a more global movement to prevent the ongoing horrors and save the people still trapped in Gaza, suffering from literally the worst thing that can be done to a population. Globalizing the Intifada, then, would be to save hundreds of thousands of people by standing up against a state doing unimaginable evil. Zohran Mamdani never said that we should do this, but if he had, would he be wrong? The alternative is millions dead. Let's be real, though. The real reason that people are terrified of the phrase globalize the Intifada is simply because they're racist. People hear an Arabic word and immediately shit their pants, thinking that they're on one of the planes that got hijacked on 9/11 because their brain associates anything Arab with because they're racist. That's the only way you can go from Zohran being asked to condemn a phrase with an Arabic word in that he never said to Senator Gillibrand ranting about how Zohran apparently called for global jihad. There is no way to explain this without coming to the conclusion that a huge chunk of establishment Democrats and the American media are horrendously racist and Islamophobic. So, to borrow from the words of Zohran Mamdani himself, let's use an example of an intifada that you might understand as not being a scary brown person event, but as something right, something necessary, to fight against an evil that is actively trying to destroy the people who are rising up.
The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was the largest single revolt by Jews during World War II. Nazi Germany cleared the Jewish quarter of the city with brutal force. Thousands were and anyone who survived was taken to a concentration camp.
On the 19th of April 1943, the SS and Nazi police entered the Warsaw Ghetto to abduct the remaining Jewish populace and march them to their death in the gas chambers. The Nazis were ambushed by Jewish insurgents who threw Molotov cocktails and hand grenades, setting military vehicles on fire and taking 59 Nazis out of commission. This undisputed act of heroism is the classic example of an intifada, and the word for this event, an uprising, in Arabic, is intifada. Zohran Mamdani actually cited this himself as an example of why he would not condemn the use of this term. Because he shouldn't. Because it just means uprising. The phrase is only scary to you if you're terrified of the Arabic language, or perhaps because you are in the nation that is doing the occupying, that is doing what the Nazis were doing in the Warsaw Ghetto, and systematically disappearing an entire people. And if you are, I just have to ask, why aren't you rising up? Up until extremely recently, the Arabic translation of the US Memorial Museum, so this was approved and signed off on by a major American Jewish institution just to give this legitimacy, referred to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising as the Warsaw Ghetto Intifada. And indeed, the official Arabic name for this event, in which Jews trapped in the Warsaw Ghetto fought back against their Nazi occupiers, is the Intifada Ghetto Warsaw. Sorry if I butchered that pronunciation. Literally, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Since, as we've covered, the Arabic word for uprising is intifada. In fact, the US Museum only changed their language on this after the against the Palestinians was already in full swing in 2024, changing the word intifada to muqawama, or resistance in Arabic, which is just a bad translation. The Warsaw Ghetto Resistance, that's not its name, it's not a thing. It means something kind of different. We understand the difference between, say, the French Resistance and the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Although they were both efforts to fight back against their Nazi occupiers and had certain similarities, these are two different things. But the word intifada is associated with Palestinians, because they are occupied and have fought back on 2 occasions against their occupiers in uprisings. So we can't be using that language. That's a scary brown person word. And we might upset the occupiers. Would somebody think of the occupiers? If I'm going to be charitable, the people who are terrified of the word intifada are not just profoundly Islamophobic, but they are terrified of a literal third intifada. That is, a third uprising of the Palestinians against their occupiers. And to this end, they support the unthinkable to prevent that ever happening again.
This is the spot in Jabalia refugee camp where the first intifada started 30 years ago. An Israeli patrol here was surrounded by hundreds of teenage boys, and the soldiers ran for cover into these buildings here, and from there fired indiscriminately into the crowds. Since then, life for the Palestinians here has only gotten worse.
The first intifada was a largely spontaneous series of Palestinian demonstrations, non-violent actions like mass boycotts, and Palestinians refusing to work jobs in Israel, and attacks using rocks, Molotov cocktails, and occasionally firearms on Israelis. Palestinian fatalities dramatically outpaced Israeli ones, as the Israeli military responded to protests and attacks with heavy force. So that's how Vox describes the first Intifada, but can you see what they've left out here? Largely a spontaneous series of uprisings? Well, was there no spark then for them rising up? Could it be the way they've been treated for almost 40 years? Could it be, in fact, not just because of that, but because on the 9th December 1987, an Israeli truck driver rammed parked civilian vehicles in the Jabalia refugee camp for innocent Palestinian refugees. Even in the stories of their resistance, Palestinians are painted as rising up against their colonial occupiers for no real reason, and spreading violence and unrest against the poor Israelis who've done nothing except expel them from their homes, systematically murder thousands of their friends and family, force them into open-air prisons and refugee camps, and terrorize them on a daily basis, preventing them from living any sort of normal life. And even in those conditions, when they perform random acts of terror against the Palestinian population, the victims of this terror are the ones who end up taking the blame. And even if they do fight back, is a child with a rock really equivalent to a full-grown man with a combat gear and a machine gun? Vox, for some reason, also equivocates between who was at fault for the Second Intifada, which seems bananas to me, since at that point, in the year 2000, Israel had been occupying Palestine for over 50 years, and against any Muslim who gets even close to giving a voice to the community and to justice.
I get messages that say the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim. I get threats on my life. On the people that I love.
Zohran Mamdani was rightly upset by the smearing of him as an anti-Semite, and constant attacks on his character for not being appropriately terrified of Arabic words, and falling over himself to say nice things about a state currently committing the worst crime it is possible to commit. Anyone practicing annihilation should not be praised and treated with. They should, I think we can all agree, be stopped. But what's more scary to an American senator or a news reporter? The annihilation of millions, or a Muslim with principles? Clearly, it's the latter. And this goes beyond Zohran. The treatment of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib has been similarly horrific, with Rashida Tlaib, the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, censored by Congress with an overwhelming majority of votes for speaking up for Palestinians, her people, facing unspeakable devastation and in November 2023. And Ilhan Omar is constantly smeared as a terrorist. This is not reasonable critique. This is Islamophobia. This is blatant racism. And Zohran is getting hit hard by this. The smears will keep coming. And they will be relentless. Just as they were in the UK against Corbyn. But they will be much, much worse. Because Jeremy Corbyn is not a Muslim. And the combination of unfounded smears of anti-Semitism and demands you answer for every phrase part of your coalition has uttered, even if they are only scary to the mainstream because of the sight of an Arabic word makes them vomit blood. This is much more hostile and much more dangerous when used against a Muslim.
Is anyone surprised that I am being targeted? Is anyone surprised that I am somehow deemed unworthy to speak about American foreign policy? Or that they see me as a powerful voice that needs to be silenced? Frankly, it is expected, because when you push power, power pushes back.
So we need to know the kind of attacks we're going to be facing and debunking. Big and small, from evil and racist to just plain pathetic. And so, to try and not end on some of the darkest things human beings can do and the horrific things we're going to see flung against Zohran, let's take a trip down bizarro memory lane at some of the accusations thrown at Jeremy Corbyn, a similar insurgent left-wing figure who was monstered by the British press for 4 years in a relentless string of attacks. The main one that stuck was calling him anti-Semitic for his lifelong support of Palestine. I like to think that the British media is uniquely toxic, but Zohran is a Muslim, so I suspect that he will get it much worse than this nice old white man who just wanted to make jam and make people's lives better. So think of this as a tutorial level to the smears we will see in the coming months or years, if he gets elected mayor. Courtesy of the Independent article, The 7 Most Ludicrous Stories About Jeremy Corbyn.
Would you nationalise sausages?
Firstly, a Daily Express story titled "Revealed: The Evil Monster Haunting Jeremy Corbyn's Past." A chilling horror story about how Jeremy Corbyn's great-great-grandfather was a really awful manager. Something Corbyn could definitely do something about as someone who wasn't born yet. To be honest, I don't think people writing for the Daily Express should be trying to tarnish anyone for what their great-great-grandfathers were doing, given, you know, the unspeakable evils of British colonialism and the class that tends to write for the Daily Express. But that's not anywhere near as shocking as that time that, according to the Daily Mail, Jeremy Corbyn welcomed the prospect of an asteroid wiping out humanity. Or, if cosmic level threats aren't to your taste, how about the time that, according to the Daily Telegraph, no relation, Jeremy Corbyn planned to turn Britain into Zimbabwe? Something that I didn't know was possible. But if Corbyn can pull asteroids out the skies to destroy capitalism in a final apocalyptic strike, I suppose turning Britain into one of the countries we ruined through settler colonialism isn't beyond his dark powers. And of course, who could forget the very real made-up story, The 1,000 Days That Destroyed Britain? A short story by David Thomas, published in the Mail on Sunday, which imagined Jeremy Corbyn's hypothetical prime ministerial term as a sort of epilogue for Revenge of the Sith. See, this one I remember very clearly. It's genuinely batshit. Just listen to this. The night sky over London was thick with choking black smoke, but in the hellish glow of flames rising from a myriad burning buildings, the rioters, looters and demonstrators fighting on the city streets could just about make out the United Nations helicopter taking Jeremy Corbyn away from 10 Downing Street to his retirement cottage in Ireland. Not for him the Prime Minister's Jaguar, in which his hated Mrs. Thatcher had departed on the night that she too was deposed. All government cars had long since been sold in a desperate bid to pay off the £3 trillion national debt after the International Monetary Fund and the European Central Bank had refused to hand a bankrupt basket case Britain any more emergency loans. In any case, the streets just weren't safe enough for a Prime Minister to drive along. Not since the police, furious at being unpaid for months, had gone on an indefinite strike. Oh, wow, based. British Airways reported record ticket sales on first-class flights out of London, and none at all coming back. One Direction went off on a US tour and never returned. Oh no! Not One Direction! We're ruined! Ruined! Look at this fucking picture. Tragedy. One Direction flew to America and never returned. Harry Styles quoted as saying, "I must go now. My home planet needs me." Now, will One Direction have to flee yet another country if Zohran is elected mayor of New York? That remains to be seen. For now, all I can say is, get ready for this exact amount of absolute madness, except more racist. The media and politicians will appear to have completely detached from reality, and many sensible liberal people you know who you thought were, okay people, will buy it, and even perpetuate it. And much like with those who spent the months following October 7th newly radicalised against Muslims and blaming them for their own destruction, this will be accompanied by a disgusting and bipartisan rise in Islamophobia. And we're going to have to be ready to fight that. But it will be an uphill struggle. Already, in an analysis of New York Times coverage by Adam Johnson, the column, we can see that the New York Times, America's paper of record, ran many more, articles about Zohran Mamdani not saying globalize the intifada than it did about the daily of Palestinians just queuing up to get food at the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites. 32 articles about Zohran to 13 about the GHF horrors. They only wrote 7 about the flower, 5 about starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza, 2 about Hind Rajab, 2 about child amputees, and 0, absolutely 0, on Amnesty International's report on Israel's use of aid to commit 32 articles about a phrase Mamdani never said. and about how him not saying it, but not telling other people not to say it, is pure evil, than about the actual crime of crimes. You know, the thing that we're all taught is the most evil thing you can do and should be stopped at all costs. Apparently that's not as bad as it's not saying a word. We're already living in a media landscape that reads like it's living on a different planet. Editorial lines that revolve around Islamophobia and a modern Red Scare, rather than the issues the newspapers should be tackling constantly and demanding governments be held to the fire over. Hell, they should be the ones holding the feet to that fire. Instead, what do we have? In the midst of the most horrific events of the 21st century so far, we prioritise not stopping those events, or even reporting on those events, but on harassing a brown man over a phrase he never said, and demanding he answer for everything anyone Muslim or pro-Palestine has ever said. And if this is how American media is talking about Gaza, a year and a half into this horror show, no matter what Zohran may or may not say, is globalizing the Intifada such a terrible idea? For the rest of you, I hope you can one day have your own Zohran Mamdani wherever you live. Until then, go outside, see the sun shine, and ride, perhaps, your very own Chairman Mao style bicycle. Thanks for watching.
Who's the number one spice? Who's the number one spice? Bring the flavor to the fish, bring the flavor to the rice.
Woo! Hey, thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you liked it, give it a like, leave a comment, leave lots of comments, subscribe, tell your friends, share it on your page, share it with your mum, share it with your dad, share it with your stepdad, share it with your other stepdad, share it with all of your 1,000 stepdads. That sounds like an insult to your mum. It's not. I like your mum. She's very good. We're really close. Oh, hello, I'm your new stepmom. Anyway, I am unfortunately quite poor, so give me money to stop it. I would like to get out of my overdraft, please, sometime in the next 1,000 years. You can help me with that by giving me £2,000. That's not a joke, that's how much it costs. On Coffee or PayPal, links below as always. Or you can sign up to my Patreon or YouTube memberships where you get early videos, access to the members only Discord, my Swensworth, my Nintendo Switch. That was hard to say. Friend code. I've not got a Switch 2 yet because of the lack of money. You could also send me a Switch 2, I suppose, but you know, you might as well just send me the money instead. And exclusive content such as long-form interviews with some of your favourite YouTubers and stuff like that. What a great advertisement. Stuff like that. No, this is, you can tell I didn't go to marketing school. In addition to all that good stuff, you'll also, if you sign up, get your name read out at the end of each video, just like these people. LFR, Ahmed Bin Motaradzi, Taylor Wood, Treecoy, Ariella, Hannah, Progwar, Robin Thomas, Emily Eisenberg, Kathy, 1410, It's She, Daniel Van Hamelin, Big Lil Boat, George Geddes, Kira B, No Sparkling Heart, Corey, Gianna G, Mightier Than the Sword, Carolyn, Imogen Q, Luciana Frias Andrade, Adam Harry, Ndog191, Cav, Quesadilla, the Tortilla Azul, Leron, Adam Lees, Daniel Nevels, No Not Paul, MB, Wandering Wonder, Lex Phoenix, Enter Krizitz, Mirror D, Jade Senior, Boa Ear, James W, Marva, and Or Thorngill, Bob the Builder, 544554, Deborah Boone, Vegas, Zilla's Athenaeum, Vince Whitaker, Amelia Lisette, Jason Hay, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena Real, Sierra Whiskey, Ali Cackle, John N, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Data, Robin Podolski, Nightlight Plushy Jesus, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philip Brogger, Soma Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Diana McMillan, Caroline Relado, Alexandra Lilly, PJ Lisbrel, Howard Lott, Nara Nia, Scarjan, Melissa Allen, Butt Burglar, Artaxis, Builds Things, Sarah Francesca Smith, and Rachel. Thank you so much. Enjoy your Zohran. Is that okay? That's not a thing anyone has ever said before. What do people say in New York? Hey, I'm walking here. Enjoy walking there. Bada bing. Big Apple. Pizza. Don Corleone. Was he even in New York? I don't fucking know. Okay, I'm going. Bye.